Ava Williams had poured 3 years into Sterling Corp. 3 years of exhausting late nights, ensuring every single project was perfect, picking up the pieces when others dropped the ball. Yet, none of that registered with Mark Sterling. He didn't acknowledge her commitment, didn't see the lost sleep or the weekends given up for the company. What he saw was a black woman occupying an office he felt she hadn't earned. The conference room felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you. Ava sat opposite Mark, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, a knot tightening in her stomach. She'd been summoned without any prior explanation. She wasn't worried she hadn't done anything wrong, but Mark's smug expression set her on edge. "Ava," he started, leaning back his chair as if settling in for a moment he'd eagerly anticipated. "I'll get straight to it. We're letting you go. Just like that. No lead-up, no discussion." Ava blinked. "Excuse me." Mark let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking his head as if deeply disappointed. It's not working out. I don't believe you're the right fit for us here." Her chest constricted. Not a good fit. Her voice stayed level, even as her heart began to pound against her ribs. "Mark, I've been here for 3 years. My performance reviews are excellent." "Look," Mark interrupted, adjusting his tie. "It's a business decision. Let's not make this unpleasant." Unpleasant? A wave of heat washed over Ava, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of the reaction he clearly wanted. She'd sensed this coming, the subtle digs, the way her ideas were conveniently adopted and presented by someone else, someone white, who then received the accolades. She'd seen Mark talk over her in meetings, ignore her emails, and dismiss her contributions as mere background noise. And now this. "I see," she said, her voice steady, hiding the anger simmering just below the surface. "Is there a specific reason?" "Because according to the employee handbook, termination requires just cause. Unless there's something I'm missing." Mark smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that revealed his enjoyment of the situation. "Things change," he stated simply, tapping his fingers on the polished table. "We're heading in a different direction." It was written all over his face. He was daring her to argue, to fight back. Because if she did, she'd become the angry black woman, the difficult employee, the one accused of making everything about race when, in fact, it was. Ava took a slow, deliberate breath. "All right." She glanced at the HR representative sitting rigidly in the corner, studiously avoiding eye contact. Spineless. She stood, smoothing her blouse. "I'll have my desk cleared by the end of the hour." Mark smirked, obviously having expected more resistance. When none came, he simply nodded. "Good." Ava turned sharply and walked out, head held high, pride intact. But inside, she was seething. She could hear the whispers as she packed her belongings. Not everyone at Sterling Corp was like Mark Sterling. Some were decent, even supportive. But there were also those who avoided her gaze, relieved it wasn't them facing the axe. Her closest work friend, Sarah, hovered near her desk. "Ava, I just don't get it. What happened?" Ava offered a small, tight smile. "Guess I wasn't a good fit." Sarah's expression soured. "That's BS. You work harder than half the people in this office." She lowered her voice. "Mark's a racist, Ava. We all know it." Ava had to let out a short, humorless laugh despite everything. And yet, nobody ever calls him on it. Sarah looked down, guilty but offering no argument. "Don't worry about me," Ava said, closing her laptop and sliding it into her bag. "I'll land on my feet." Sarah hesitated, then gave her a quick, tight hug. "They don't deserve you here." Ava appreciated the gesture, but what she craved right now wasn't sympathy. It was justice. As she walked through the office one last time, a hush seemed to follow her. Eyes darted away. Mark Sterling's office door was slightly ajar, and she caught a glimpse of him inside, looking completely unfazed as he scrolled through his phone. She could have exploded. She could have called him out right then and there, in front of everyone. But she didn't. She didn't have to. The universe often finds its own ways to restore balance. And Mark Sterling was about to learn that lesson firsthand, the hard way. Mark Sterling leaned back in his executive leather chair, feeling a sense of triumph. The burden of dealing with Ava Williams was finally gone. He'd wanted her out for months. She was too direct, too intelligent, too unwilling to play the corporate game his way. She made meetings tense. She had an uncanny ability to make him look inadequate simply by being competent. Now she was gone. The office felt normal again, just how he liked it. Or so he believed. Mark glanced at his phone, noticing an incoming call from an unknown number. He scowled, tempted to ignore it, but an instinct told him to answer. Sterling speaking. A pause, then a voice one he instantly recognized but hadn't anticipated hearing today. Mark, we need to talk. His breath hitched for a fraction of a second before he forced himself to sound composed. He hadn't spoken to this man directly in some time, but he knew better than to seem flustered. Ah, good to hear from you, Mark said smoothly, standing and adjusting his shirt cuffs. What's the occasion? The voice on the other end remained icy. I just finished a call with Ava Williams. A slight twist formed in Mark's gut, but he maintained an even tone. Is that right? You fired her today. It wasn't phrased as a question. Mark exhaled dramatically, forcing a casual chuckle. Yes, I did. We're making some adjustments. The company is moving in a new direction. Silence. A long, heavy silence followed. Then the voice spoke again. Do you have any clue what you just done? Mark frowned. I made a necessary business decision. I have the authority to... You just fired the wrong person, Sterling. Something in the delivery made Mark's grip on the phone tighten. There was an undercurrent in that voice, something dangerous. He walked over and shut his office door. I'm not sure what you're implying, but I don't answer to anyone regarding my hiring and firing practices. Don't be ridiculous, Mark. The voice cut in sharply. Do you even know who Ava Williams is? Mark let out a short, dismissive laugh. She was a project manager. Replaceable. A pause, then a man on the phone chuckled, but it wasn't friendly. It sent a shiver down Mark's spine. Ava Williams is my niece. Mark's breath caught before he could stop it. Niece? The word hit him like a physical blow. That couldn't be right. That man? No. Mark swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. I know, the voice replied, tight with controlled fury. And let me be perfectly clear, Mark. I take family very seriously. Mark's mind raced connections, influence, power, and suddenly, it was all aligning against him. Of all the people he could have let go today, it had to be her. Listen, Mark began, forcing his voice to remain calm, measured, professional. I didn't terminate her for personal reasons. It was strictly a performance-based. A scoff cut him off. Cut the crap, Mark. We both know that's a lie. Ava is one of the sharpest, most dedicated professionals I know. And unlike you, I actually pay attention to who's making things happen behind the scenes. You think I'm unaware of what's been going on at your company? Mark pressed his fingers to his temple, trying to think straight. I had no idea she was related to you. Oh, I'm well aware you didn't, the voice stated, laced with suppressed anger. Because if you had, you wouldn't have dared pull a stunt this idiotic. But it's too late for excuses now. Mark slowly sank back into his chair, feeling an unfamiliar chill spread through him. You're making a mistake, he said, though for the first time in ages, he wasn't entirely sure he believed his own words. No, the voice countered firmly. You already made the mistake. And trust me, Mark, you're going to feel it. The call disconnected. Mark stared at his phone, gripping it as if it were about to detonate. His pulse hammered. This was bad. This was really, really bad. He set the phone down and started pacing. Damage control. He needed serious damage control. This wasn't the first time he'd fired someone unfairly, but it was the first time the repercussions had hit so swiftly and potentially devastatingly. Mark's mind shifted into overdrive. He could salvage this. He always did. First, he needed to assess exactly how much leverage this man wielded. He opened his laptop and started searching connections, investments, political influence. It was far worse than he'd imagined. His stomach plummeted. If only he had known. A knock on his office door made him jump. His assistant, Jessica, peeked incautiously. Sir? There's a situation. Mark took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and forced a composed expression. What kind of situation? Jessica hesitated. I think you need to check your email. His brow furrowed. He grabbed his mouse, refreshed his inbox, and felt his stomach truly drop. The subject line read, Mark Sterling's discrimination problem, a statement from Ava Williams. The email was already exploding. It wasn't just internal, it had gone public. Sent to every executive, major client, and partner firm. Ava had laid everything bare. The pervasive culture of discrimination, the toxic work environment, the blatant leadership bias. And she had proof, emails, documents, evidence. Mark's hands balled into fists. This was war. And for the first time in his professional life, he wasn't the one holding the reins. Mark Sterling had built his entire career on maintaining control. Every calculated move, every decision, every interaction was designed to keep him firmly at the top. But now, the ground beneath his feet felt like it was fracturing, crumbling, collapsing. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His inbox was a battlefield of furious executives demanding answers, PR nightmares erupting in real time, and legal threats gathering like storm clouds over his empire. Ava's email had gone viral. The board had seen it. Investors had seen it. Clients had seen it. And Ava? She was no longer just a dismissed employee. She had become a symbol. Her story resonated across social media, sparking not just sympathy but outrage. Current and former Sterling Corp employees began adding their own accounts of mistreatment, discrimination, and toxic leadership online. The carefully constructed facade Mark had maintained for years was shattering. His assistant, Jessica, stood rigidly by the door, her usual forced pleasantness replaced by thinly veiled panic. "Sir," she said, her voice strained, "you need to get out in front of this." Mark exhaled slowly, keeping his face a neutral mask. "Report. What's the damage?" Jessica hesitated. "Multiple major clients are reassessing their contracts. A few have already pulled out completely. Social media is a wildfire, and HR has been fielding nonstop calls from news reporters all morning." Mark's jaw clenched. "Reporters?" Jessica nodded. "They're outside the main entrance. Some are already in the lobby." Of course, they were. The vultures always arrive eventually. Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. "Schedule an emergency meeting with the board. I need to manage this narrative." Jessica didn't budge. He looked up. She swallowed hard. "The board. They already called an emergency meeting, sir." Mark blinked. "What?" Jessica hesitated, then carefully placed a folded letter on his desk. "Effective immediately. They're suspending you as CEO pending a full investigation." For the first time in his professional life, Mark Sterling froze. The words didn't compute. Suspended? Him? His grip tightened on the desk's edge. "They can't do that." "They can, sir," Jessica murmured, her voice barely audible. "And they did." Mark snatched the letter, his eyes scanning the text, searching desperately for a loophole, a technicality, anything to reverse this. But the language was stark and unambiguous. He was out. Not permanently, not yet, but he was undeniably no longer in command. And if he wasn't in command, then who? "Who's replacing me?" "Temporarily," he demanded, his voice sharp. Jessica hesitated again. Before she could respond, his office phone rang. Neither Mark nor Jessica moved. They both sensed it. Something significant was unfolding. When Mark finally lifted the receiver, the voice on the other end was chillingly familiar. "Mark," the voice said, almost casually. "How's your morning treating you?" Mark's fingers curled tightly around the phone. "What do you want?" A soft chuckle. "You know exactly what I want. I want you to listen." Mark forced himself to remain outwardly calm, but his pulse was racing. "I don't have time for your games." "No, you certainly don't," the voice agreed smoothly. "Which is why I'll keep this brief." "You're finished, Mark." Mark let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can force me out? I built this company." "I have." "You had power," the voice corrected coolly. "Now you're sinking. And the most pathetic part? You did this entirely to yourself." Mark's knuckles turned white. "This is a setup. A witch hunt. People like you." The voice cut him off sharply. "People like me?" Silence hung heavy, dangerous. Mark's own heartbeat felt deafening. Then the voice continued, slower, deliberate. "You mean people who refuse to let men like you get away with their prejudice anymore?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had no defense. "You underestimated her," the voice went on. "You treated her like she was insignificant. And now, she holds more power than you do." Mark swallowed hard. "She didn't just walk away, Mark. She stood up. And now, you're the one falling." Mark slammed the phone down, his chest heaving. This couldn't be real. This wasn't happening. But it was. And deep down, a chilling certainty settled in. The worst was still ahead. Mark Sterling sat alone in his office, or what remained of it. The once immaculate space was now chaotic, papers strewn about, personal effects dumped unceremoniously into packing boxes. It was the aftermath of a king being forcibly ejected from his own castle. Just days before, this office had been his command center, a symbol of undisputed authority. Now, it was a monument to his own hubris. Outside, he could hear the low murmur of voices, employees whispering, occasionally glancing towards his door, not with fear, but with poorly hidden satisfaction. He'd noticed a change in their eyes lately. Some looked amused, others openly contemptuous. They weren't scared of him anymore. That stung more than anything. He hadn't just lost his title. He'd lost the fear he commanded. A sharp rap on the door startled him. He looked up, expecting Jessica or some other board-appointed drone sent to ensure he vacated promptly and quietly. But it wasn't Jessica. It was her. Ava Williams stepped into his former office as if she owned the place. Because in a way, now she did. She didn't look vengeful or smug. She looked serene. That infuriated him more than any display of anger could have. He forced himself upright, maintaining a neutral mask. "Ava," he said evenly, as if they were colleagues, as if he still held any power. She offered a calm smile. "Mark." A beat of loaded silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke. "I wanted to see it for myself." Mark's eyes narrowed. "See what?" She gestured subtly at the disarray around him. The downfall of a man who believed he was untouchable. Mark clenched his jaw. "You find this amusing?" "No," she replied simply. "I find it just—" He scoffed. "You think you caused this? You're not that significant, Ava." She laughed then, not cruelly, not mockingly, just genuinely amused. "Mark, I didn't do this to you," she said, shaking her head slightly. "You did this entirely to yourself." Mark offered no reply. There was nothing left to say. Everything had unraveled with terrifying speed. The board had turned. Shareholders panicked at the headlines and damning statements, watching as every buried truth about Sterling Corp bubbled to the surface. Clients fled, lawsuits began mounting, and the board, backed into a corner, had no alternative. They removed him. Officially, it was spun as a resignation, a carefully worded press release meant to salvage a shred of dignity. But everyone knew the reality. Mark Sterling was out. And Ava Williams? She had been offered a significant role. Not CEO, not yet, anyway, but a senior leadership position that sent a clear message about where the board's trust now lay. "Must feel satisfying," Mark muttered, bitterness coating his words. She tilted her head slightly. "It doesn't feel bad." He hated her in that moment, more intensely than he'd ever hated anyone. Because she hadn't just won. She had endured, outlasted him, and risen above. She turned to go, but paused at the doorway. "One more thing," she said. Mark remained silent. She looked back at him, her gaze direct and steady. "Do you understand why you lost?" He exhaled sharply. "I lost because you—" "No," she cut him off firmly. "You lost because you thought power came from pushing others down. But real power, Mark? Real power comes from lifting people up. And that's something you'll likely never understand." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need one. Mark Sterling's chapter was closed. Ava Williams' story was just beginning.